Vincent Torino came to Romano's to confront a traitor. He didn't know he was about to start a war for a stranger. Romano's on a Friday night was a storm of noise, forks clattering, wine glasses chiming, bursts of laughter ricocheting off brick walls. A warm, chaotic symphony. Except at table 15. There, silence lived. Vincent's silence. He sat with the posture of someone who never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. Back to the wall. Suis immaculate. Expression colder than the knife folded inside his jacket. He was waiting for Marcus, the childhood friend who faked his own death, stole $3 million, and vanished. Marcus was late, 17 minutes late. In Vincent's world, timekeeping wasn't etiquette. It was loyalty. He lifted his glass. The wine didn't matter. The gesture did. It forced him to look at the door without looking like he was waiting. The door opened. Not Marcus. What walked in wasn't danger yet, just the scent of it. A man in a worn leather jacket scanned the room with predatory familiarity. A woman followed, shoulders tight, chin tucked, fingers crushing her purse strap, as if she were holding herself together. Then came the little girl, 7, maybe 8, too small for the weight in her eyes, hair uncombed, shoes scuffed, dress slightly crooked, like no one bothered to straighten it before pushing her out of a car. She didn't marvel at the lights or the bustle. Her gaze flicked only to exits, corners, threats. They were seated at table 12, close enough that Vincent could read the story in their body language. The leather jacket ordered quickly, controlling every detail. The woman flinched at his tone. The little girl didn't move at all. Fear radiated from her like a quiet siren. Then she looked up, straight at Vincent. Most people broke eye contact with him after a second. They didn't know why. Some instinct just screamed danger. He'd lived his entire life turning that instinct into power. But the girl held his gaze, searching, measuring, choosing. She reached for a purple crayon from the kid's cup. Her hand shook so hard she nearly dropped it. Under the table, she wrote on a napkin, quick, terrified strokes. She hesitated, then tore the corner, crushed it in her tiny fist, dropped it to the floor, and with a courage too big for her small frame, she nudged it forward. The napkin slid across the tile, soft at first, then gathering speed, past dress shoes, past a server's feet, until it tapped against Vincent's Italian leather shoe. He didn't react. Not yet. He waited for a waiter to pass, then leaned down as if adjusting his cuff. He picked up the napkin, unfolded it. Purple crayon, shaky letters. One word, help. He looked up. The girl was watching him with a look no child should know. Fear sharpened into hope. She thought she had placed her life in the hands of a monster, and she had. What the men at table 12 saw was a wealthy man minding his own business. What they didn't know, Vincent had a detective in his phone who owed him his daughter's life. A single text from Vincent could bring 10 armed officers into Romano's faster than these men could touch their guns. The leather jacket said something to the waiter, then squeezed the girl's shoulder. Too hard, too deliberate. Vincent felt the old coldness rise inside him, the part of him that didn't shout, the part that simply decided. He closed his fist around the napkin. The paper crumpled with a soft crackle, like a fuse sparking inside his palm. Then he stood. The chair scraped violently across the tile. One hard, jarring sound that sliced through every conversation around him. Laughter died. Glassware froze mid-toast. Even the kitchen noise seemed to hush, as if the entire restaurant sensed something shift. In a room full of sound, Vincent created a vacuum just by rising. He buttoned his jacket, a tiny, elegant motion. A predator adjusting his armor. He didn't look at the entrance where Marcus might appear. Didn't glance toward exits. Didn't need to. His gaze locked on table 12. The kidnappers didn't notice him yet, but everyone else did, because when Vincent Torino moved with purpose, the air moved with him. He took one step forward, then another, slow, controlled, claiming the space between him and the danger like he owned the floor. And for the first time that night, the men at table 12 had chosen the wrong restaurant. Vincent Torino, the monster, at table 15, was coming for them. Vincent moved past table 12 with the casual stride of a man taking a walk, not a man preparing to dismantle a nightmare. He didn't look at the girl. He didn't look at the mother. He let the two men believe he hadn't noticed anything at all. Predators relaxed when they thought they were unseen. Just as he passed, he heard the one in the leather jacket mutter, "Keep her quiet." The girl stiffened. The woman swallowed a sob. Vincent kept walking. He stepped into the shadowed hallway near the restrooms. Quieter, cooler, a small pocket of calm away from the noise outside. The faint scent of lavender soap drifted through the air. He slipped a hand into his jacket and texted Tony with quick, sharp movements, asking for the plate on the black sedan outside. Vincent didn't pace. He didn't curse. He wasn't a man who reacted. He calculated. A moment later, his phone buzzed again, but it wasn't Tony. It was Marcus, the ghost, a name that shouldn't appear on a living man's phone. For one cold second, Vincent stared at the message with the flat expression of someone watching a familiar enemy reload a gun. Marcus had written, "Didn't think you'd actually show tonight." Vincent didn't blink. Marcus wasn't just alive. He was close and watching. The timing wasn't coincidence. Marcus resurfacing on the same night, a child whispered for help. It meant the betrayal wasn't over. It was growing. Then Tony finally replied, and the message twisted the night even darker. The plate belonged to Meridian Holdings, a shell corporation tied to offshore accounts and warehouses, the kind of operation that dealt in people, not product. Vincent exhaled slowly. This wasn't a domestic dispute. This was organized acquisition. Something inside him hardened. The restroom door opened, and a busboy nearly walked into him. One glance at Vincent's expression sent the kid hurrying down the hall. Vincent dialed Detective Morrison, a man who definitely didn't want to hear from him tonight. Morrison answered half asleep, half annoyed, but Vincent cut straight through. He demanded a plainclothes officer. No sit-ins, no uniforms, just a quiet wellness check. Morrison pushed back, until Vincent added, "A woman and a child, 2 armed escorts, talking transport schedules." Silence gripped the line. Then Morrison's voice changed. "What did you see?" Vincent answered with 4 words that ended every argument. "A girl asked me for help." That was all Morrison needed. He promised a unit in 5 to 7 minutes. Vincent told him to make it 4. When he stepped out of the hallway and back into the restaurant, the sound crashed over him again. The clatter of silverware, the hum of conversations, the soft oblivion of people who had no idea what was unfolding a few tables away. He circled wide, never using the same path twice. Predictability got people killed. He reached table 15 and sat down, but he wasn't the same man who had left it. His posture shifted, his eyes sharpened, his hands grew still. At table 12, the man in the leather jacket was still on his phone, voice tense. His partner stood guard, scanning the room with trained precision. They didn't see Vincent sit. They didn't feel the air shift. Not yet. Vincent reached for the steak knife beside his plate. Not the gun. Not the wine. The knife, simple stainless steel, harmless to anyone who didn't know how to use it. He lifted it gently and rolled it between his fingers. The blade caught the overhead lights and reflected a thin, bright line, sharp, cold, and deliberate. That strip of light cut across the room and landed directly on the leather jacket's face. The man blinked, irritated, looked around, didn't find the source. Vincent lowered the knife and set it down with a soft click. A warning, a quiet message. I see you. I've chosen you, and you won't like what comes next." His phone vibrated again. Tony. Movement at a warehouse tonight. Trucks. Schedules. And the worst part, the girl wasn't the only one being moved. Vincent didn't respond. He smoothed the crumpled napkin the girl had given him and set it on the table, deliberately visible, a vow laid out on white linen. His eyes locked on table 12. 4 minutes until Morrison arrived. 4 minutes where anything could ignite. 4 minutes for monsters to decide who lived through the night. Vincent whispered to himself, calm and absolute. It won't be them. The decision wasn't a spark, it was a fuse already burning. And before the next chapter ended, the men at table 12 would learn the truth. They were never predators. They were prey sitting under the gaze of a hunter. The second man arrived beside the leather jacket like a blade sliding into its sheath, broad shoulders, close-cropped hair, movements sharp and military clean. He didn't sit. He took position behind the woman and the child, a silent wall of muscle meant to discourage hope. The temperature of the room shifted. Even if the diners didn't notice, Vincent did. He observed from table 15, posture relaxed, eyes half-lidded, the way lions appear sleepy seconds before they pounce. But every detail sharpened in his mind. 2 men, 2 weapons, 1 exit they guarded too carefully. The woman stared at her untouched plate, knuckles white around her napkin. The girl sat rigid, feet dangling above the floor, shoulders trembling with each breath she tried to hide. The first man leaned in and whispered, "We leave soon. Keep the package calm." Package. Vincent didn't flinch. His hand simply stilled on the table. The girl's fingers brushed her crayon, but it slipped and rolled off the edge of the table with a tiny tap. She froze. Didn't reach for it. Didn't dare. Sit still. The second man snapped, low, controlled, enough to slice the air without needing volume. A nearby couple paused mid-conversation, sensing something wrong but unable to name it. The girl lifted her eyes again and found Vincent. Her lips moved. "Please." The sound didn't travel, but the meaning did. Vincent's breathing didn't change, but his decision settled like iron in his chest. The second man's gaze followed hers and landed on Vincent. A long, quiet stare. Predator. Evaluating predator. Status checking status. Vincent didn't blink, didn't look away, didn't grant him even the courtesy of tension. It was the second man who broke eye contact first, but then the restaurant door opened and 2 plainclothes agents stepped inside. They looked like ordinary men grabbing dinner. If ordinary men carried authority like a concealed weapon, the traffickers noticed instantly. The first man murmured, "We need to move." The second man's right hand drifted toward his jacket. Hovering above the concealed gun, Vincent rose. Slow, deliberate, inevitable. Chairs shifted around him as diners leaned back instinctively, creating space without realizing why. The air thickened, anticipating something it couldn't name. Vincent walked toward table 12, each step soundless but heavy with intention. Not a charge, not a rush, a claiming. He stopped at the head of their table. No weapon drawn, no threat spoken, just presence. The little girl looked up at him the way drowning people look at land. The first man stiffened, the second man's stance tightened. Vincent reached into his jacket. Both men snapped into readiness, hands half-drawn, eyes wide, muscles coiled. But Vincent didn't pull a gun. He pulled the napkin, the crumpled white corner with the purple word. He smoothed it once between his fingers, then placed it gently, precisely, on the center of their table. The quiet paper on linen sound cut deeper than any bang. Silence radiated outward. The first man froze. The second man hesitated. He looked at the napkin, then at Vincent, then at the napkin again. For one brief, perfect second. His face showed something rare in men like him: confusion. Why was this well-dressed stranger putting trash on his table? Then the realization hit him. Not trash. Evidence. A message. A declaration of war written in a child's frightened hand. His nostrils flared. Rage followed confusion like thunder after lightning. Vincent tapped the napkin with one finger. Soft, almost courteous. "I believe you dropped this." The words were quiet, almost polite, but no one at the table misunderstood them. The girl's eyes welled. The mother's breath caught in her throat. The second man's hand plunged toward his weapon. Vincent leaned forward half an inch. A movement so controlled it barely registered, but so powerful it rewrote the room's hierarchy. The second man froze mid-draw, not because he feared Vincent's gun, but because he feared Vincent. Behind Vincent, Morrison's agents approached, slow, silent, strategic, closing in from two angles. The first man swallowed hard, eyes darting between the napkin, the predator in front of him, and the plainclothes officers drawing closer. Vincent's shadow fell across the table. Swallowing the candlelight, he lowered his voice to a quiet, ice-edged murmur. "From here on out, you follow my schedule." The traffickers stiffened. The girl exhaled, just once, barely audible, and the room understood, in the kind of instinctive way prey understands storms. Vincent didn't wait for an answer. He reached out and gripped the back of the empty chair between the two men. Wood creaked under his grip. He wasn't just standing at their table, he was moving in. The moment Vincent pulled the chair out, the sound sliced through the restaurant. A slow, dragging scrape that made nearby diners pause mid-fork. He sat, not like a guest, not like someone invited, but like a man reclaiming property already owed to him. Table 12 was his now. The first man stiffened, jaw tight. The second man shifted his stance, feet planting wider, hand drifting toward the inside of his jacket. Vincent didn't acknowledge either of them. He reached across the table, not for a weapon, not for their food, but for the water glass sitting in front of the terrified woman. He raised it to his lips, took a slow sip, set it down. Ownership, illustrated in one quiet, unforgivable gesture. The girl's eyes widened. The mother swallowed back a sob. Both traffickers went rigid with disbelief. Vincent leaned back a fraction, posture loose, as if this were his dining room, and he'd simply chosen a different seat tonight. The first man cleared his throat. You need to leave this table." Vincent didn't look at him. Instead, he reached into his jacket. Smooth, deliberate. Both traffickers tensed, but Vincent pulled out nothing but a slim, silver case. He opened it with a soft click and removed a toothpick. The second man's face twisted in confusion. He'd expected steel, not cedar. Vincent slid the toothpick between his teeth and spoke around it. Voice steady, a whisper wrapped in authority. "I don't." The first man clenched his fist. "You don't understand who you're." Vincent lifted one hand, silencing him without words. Then he angled the toothpick slightly, pointing it at the second man's drifting hand, hovering too close to his weapon. "Touch that," Vincent murmured, "and you won't leave this table upright." The second man froze. He hadn't been afraid before. He was now. A quiet tension wound through the air, drawing the entire restaurant into its hold. The surrounding chatter faded, as if the room itself sensed a predator crouching in the center. Vincent leaned forward, elbows settling onto the table, turning his gaze toward the girl. She looked back at him, small shoulders trembling, but something inside her steadied at the sight of him anchored there, immovable. "You two had plans tonight," Vincent said softly, eyes never leaving the traffickers. "A schedule, a deadline." The first man's breath stuttered. Vincent continued, "But your timing is terrible." Footsteps padded toward the table, measured, calm, controlled. The second man noticed them first, his face lit with sudden triumph. "Reinforcements," he thought. "Finally, He straightened, thrusting a finger toward Vincent. "Officer, this man is threatening us." He just sat down and Vincent didn't turn, didn't twitch, didn't acknowledge the accusation. He just smiled. The kind of smile that told you the punchline was yours, not his. A firm hand settled on Vincent's shoulder. The traffickers exhaled in relief, until the man attached to that hand spoke. "Good evening, Torino." Detective Morrison said. Everything stopped. The first trafficker blinked hard, like his brain refused to process the scene correctly. The second man's hand froze halfway to his jacket, fingers trembling. Vincent finally turned, not toward the traffickers, but toward Morrison. His tone was all business. "You're late." Morrison's gaze flicked from Vincent to the two men. "You need them breathing." "For now, understood." Morrison stepped past Vincent, positioning himself behind the men like a judge taking the bench. The first trafficker sputtered. "Wait. Wait. You know him." Morrison didn't even look at him. He addressed only Vincent. "What's your call?" Vincent tapped the edge of the table with one knuckle. Slow. Controlled. A code Morrison understood better than any spoken order. "Lock the exits," Vincent said. "Already done." Behind Morrison, two plainclothes officers subtly shifted, blocking pathways out of the restaurant. The second trafficker realized, too late, that he was boxed in, monster in front, police behind, nowhere to run. His face drained of color. Vincent leaned closer, toothpick shifting between his teeth, and whispered just loud enough for all three of them to hear. "From here on, every breath you take is on my schedule." The woman let out a broken sob. The girl reached for Vincent's sleeve without thinking, fingertips brushing his cuff, and neither man at table 12 dared to move a muscle. Irony curled around them like smoke. The predators had called for help, and help had answered, just not for them. Emma's small fingers tightened on Vincent's sleeve, not just holding but anchoring herself to him. Her lips trembled, a breath stuttered from her chest. Then she spoke, barely louder than a whisper, but cutting through the room like a blade. "They're not my parents." The atmosphere collapsed inward. For one suspended second, the entire restaurant forgot how to breathe. Laughter died. Plates halted mid-air. Even the background music seemed to choke on silence. The traffickers reacted first, badly. The first man lurched to his feet, voice cracking. "She's frightened. She's confused." The second man didn't bother lying. His hand went straight for the gun. Vincent moved faster. He swept Emma into his arm with a single fluid motion, turning his body between her and the flash of metal under the man's jacket. Steel glinted, fear spiked, time fractured. A shape crushed through the side doorway like a hammer through glass. "Tony." No shout, no warning, just impact. His hand clamped the second man's wrist and snapped it sideways with a sickening, wet crack. The gun never even left the holster. The trafficker collapsed, shrieking, wrist twisted at an impossible angle. Tony shoved him down with the weight of an avalanche. Boot braced between his shoulder blades. "You picked the wrong table tonight," Tony growled. The first man panicked. He grabbed the mother by her hair, dragging her toward him like a shield. Vincent flipped the table. The wooden edge slammed upward into the man's jaw. Glasses shattered. Plates exploded. Bread baskets flew. The mother fell free, collapsing into Morrison's arms as he surged forward. The trafficker stumbled back, dazed, blood dripping from his mouth. Morrison and his partner tackled him low, driving him to the ground. "Hands behind your back. Don't move." The man didn't have enough sense left to resist. Chaos erupted around them, diners screaming, serveurs ducking, chairs clattering across tile. But Vincent stood unmoved in the center of it. Emma held tight against his chest, her face buried beneath his collar, her small hands gripping his jacket like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "It's okay," he whispered. steady as stone. "I've got you." Her mother sobbed in Morrison's arms. "Emma, oh God, Emma." Emma turned her face just enough to see her mother was alive. Her lower lip shook, but she didn't let go of Vincent. Morrison hauled the first trafficker upright, snapping cuffs around his wrists. "You're done, both of you." The man spat blood. "You don't know who we work for." Tony pressed his boot down on the broken wristman's spine until he whimpered. "Nobody's coming for you," Tony said. "Not tonight." Vincent's eyes never left the men on the floor. He adjusted Emma slightly so she could breathe, clearing glass shards away with his free hand. Her heart was racing against his chest, every beat a terrified plea. Morrison approached. "We need to get her and her mother outside. Paramedics will meet us." Vincent gave a short nod. He didn't hand Emma over. He carried her. The mother followed close, trembling but alive, supported by Morrison. The four of them, Vincent, Emma, the mother, and Tony guarding the rear, stepped out of the restaurant into the night air. Flashing red-blue lights washed over them, painting their faces in flickering hues of emergency and aftermath. Emma finally loosened her grip on Vincent's jacket, only slightly. "You came," she whispered, voice trembling. Vincent's reply was quiet enough to be a secret. "I always will." But the night wasn't done, not even close. Tony emerged behind them, not with just a gun, but with the second trafficker's phone gripped tight in his hand. "Boss, Tony murmuret. You need to see this." The screen glowed in the dark, a new message blinking. One sentence, 43 units loaded, shipping in 20 minutes. Vincent's jaw clenched. Emma was safe, but 43 others were still out there, waiting in the dark, counting on someone who didn't know them, someone who didn't owe them, but someone who had just chosen to fight for the innocent tonight. The monster inside Vincent stirred, and this time it wanted a bigger table. Red and blue lights pulsed across the sidewalk, staining faces in alternating washes of panic and relief. The mother was being checked by paramedics near the back of an ambulance. Emma sat close by, wrapped in a foil blanket, her knees hugged to her chest, a purple crayon clenched tight in her small fist. Tony handed the phone to Morrison. "Unlocked. Birthday code." Tony muttered. "Real professionals." Morrison typed. The screen lit up, and the night grew heavier. Vincent stepped beside him. "Show me." Shipping schedules. Encrypted thread. False names tied to real locations. Offshore wires bouncing across half the world. And then the document that turned the air cold. A list of 43 people. Ages. Statuses. Destination codes. Ready for transport. Morrison swore under his breath. "This is organized. Military-level routing." Vincent's eyes narrowed. "Zoom in." Morrison enlarged the location pin at the bottom of the last message. "A warehouse near the docks. Coordinates. A timestamp. Pickup goes down in a few hours." Morrison said, "If we get there fast." Vincent cut him off. "That warehouse isn't there." Morrison looked at him sharply. "You know it." Vincent's jaw flexed, a memory moving behind his eyes like a shadow passing over water. "That place belonged to the Kozlov organization," he said. "Back when the Russians ran everything on the docks." Morrison frowned. "I thought that crew went underground." "They did." Vincent pointed at the map. "But the warehouse didn't. There's no front entrance access after midnight. They welded the original lock. Anyone going through the main doors tonight will get bottlenecked." Morrison lowered the phone slightly. "So your plan is—" "What?" "Tell my guys to knock louder." Vincent shook his head once. Predator calm. "There's a tunnel under the pier, old maintenance shaft, from when the Port Authority was still corrupt enough to take bribes for illegal cargo." Tony nodded. "I know the one. Smells like rust and dead fish." Vincent continued. "The shaft leads straight behind the warehouse office. No cameras, no guards. They don't even know it exists. Morrison stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled through his teeth, half disbelief, half gratitude. "You'd make a hell of a detective," he muttered. Vincent didn't smile. "You don't want me in your precinct." "Fair." Morrison pocketed the evidence pouch. "But tonight, I need that tunnel. You'll have it." A uniformed officer jogged over. "Detective, we need chain of custody confirmation." Morrison nodded. "Start recording." The body cam blinked red. "Evidence transfer." Morrison narrated. 22:43 hours. Suspect device collected. Messages, manifests, and location attachments confirmed. The officer photographed everything. The phone, the cracked screen, the thread containing the 43 names, the warehouse coordinates. He sealed the pouch with a timestamp. Chain of custody. Complete. But the weight of 43 lives pressed down harder than any procedural step could lighten. Vincent turned away from the officers and walked toward Emma. She sat quietly, legs small against the edge of the ambulance. Her grip on the purple crayon hadn't loosened. When she saw him, something in her face eased. Just a little. She lifted the crayon to show him. "I still have it." Vincent crouched to her eye level. "Good. Keep it close." Her gaze searched his face with a mixture of fear and trust. Then came the question that froze the night. "Mr. Are you a good guy or a bad guy?" Morrison stopped mid-report. Tony turned. The mother's breath hitched. Vincent didn't answer right away. He wasn't built for lies, and he wasn't built for innocence. Finally, he said softly, "I'm someone who stops bad people from hurting kids." Emma studied him, brow furrowed. "So, that means you're good." A quiet, painful beat. "Tonight?" Vincent murmured. "Yes." She nodded. A small, solemn acceptance. Then she leaned forward and hugged him. Vincent still, as if caught by surprise. But his arms lifted and wrapped around her gently, protective, careful, solid. When she pulled back, she sniffed once. "Are you going to stop the bad men at the warehouse too?" Vincent rose slowly, watching the ambulance doors close behind Emma as paramedics prepared to leave. "Yes," he said. "All of them." Morrison approached. "We're moving soon. Tactical units will hit the front entrance." Vincent's stare was sharp as a blade. "They'll be waiting for you, which is why," Morrison continued, "you and Tony are going through your tunnel." Tony cracked his knuckles. "Back doors always more fun." Flashlights flickered across the pavement. As teams prepared, radios chirped with coded chatter. Engines hummed to life. Morrison turned to Vincent one last time. "You ready for this?" Vincent's gaze drifted to the evidence pouch, to the 43 lives depending on tonight, then back to the detective. "I don't do ready," he said. "I do necessary." Morrison nodded, and just like that, the unholy alliance was sealed. Morrison stepped toward the sirens and the shouting commands. Vincent turned the other way, toward the silence, toward the dark water where the tunnel waited. Two different paths. One destination, a criminal and a cop, heading to save 43 souls from a darkness both of them knew far too well. Fog curled around the docks like a living shroud, swallowing sound and stretching shadows into long, jagged lines. Warehouse 12 loomed ahead, a black, concrete monolith, crouched beside the dark water, lit only by a flickering yellow bulb above its rusted door. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "Positions set, waiting for your signal." Vincent watched from behind stacked shipping crates. Morrison's team crouched near the patrol cars, engines ready, lights off, forming a wall of silent authority. Then, 3, 2, 1. Floodlights blasted the warehouse front. "Police, open the door." Morrison's amplified voice thundered through the fog. Chaos erupted instantly. Guards cursed, blinded by the sudden lights. Guns lifted. Shadows scrambled. The distraction had begun. Vincent turned to Tony. "Let's go." They slipped along the pier's edge like two ghosts. Vincent found the half-hidden maintenance hatch behind a mess of nets and rusted winches. Together they pried it open. Damp, cold air breathed out. Vincent dropped into the darkness first. Tony followed, closing the hatch behind them. The tunnel was narrow, dripping, reeking of rust and old seawater. Their flashlights cut thin beams through the stale air. Tony whispered, "This place feels like a grave." Vincent didn't respond. He moved faster. They reached the ladder beneath the warehouse floor. Vincent pushed the panel up an inch. One guard stood above, gun drawn, attention fixed on Morrison's chaos outside. Vincent emerged silently behind him. One arm wrapped around the man's throat. A sharp twist, the body sagged without a sound. Tony dragged it into the tunnel. Clean. They advanced deeper into the warehouse. Forklifts, pallets, chains, an industrial graveyard under dim lights. Then they heard it, a muffled cry, then another, then dozens layered together, fear trapped in metal. Vincent turned toward the sound. Rows of steel containers lined the far wall, padlocked, chained, stacked like cargo. 43 lives inside cold metal boxes. Tony whispered, "We found them." Vincent smashed the first lock with one kick. The container door groaned open. 10 people huddled together, eyes sunken, bodies shaking, wrists bruised. A woman gasped. A boy recoiled. A toddler whimpered beneath a ripped blanket. Vincent raised both hands slowly. "You're safe. We're getting you out." The boy didn't speak. He just held out the thin blanket draped over him, a filthy scrap of fabric that probably represented the only thing in the world he still owned. Tony broke another lock. "We need to move. Fast." Vincent's phone vibrated. He froze. "Not now." He stepped aside, glancing at the screen. "Marcus." He answered. A low laugh slithered through the speaker. "Vinny, you busy?" "Playing hero again." Vincent's jaw locked. "Where are you?" "I'm sightseeing. Your pier looks different tonight." "A beat. Pier 47. "Right. You really should guard your assets better." Vincent's blood chilled. Tony noticed his face. "Boss." Marcus' voice dripped poison. "While you're rescuing strays, I'm taking inventory. Quite the collection you had here. Cash, weapons, a few little secrets. But don't worry." A metallic crash echoed through the phone. "I'm only taking the valuable stuff." Vincent stared at the containers full of bruised, terrified people, at the boy clutching his thin blanket, at the mother shielding her toddler with her own body. Marcus was talking about millions of dollars. These people owned nothing but the clothes on their back, yet their lives weighed more in Vincent's chest than every vault he'd ever built. Tony whispered, "Say the word." Vincent didn't move, didn't breathe. Marcus continued, voice oily and amused. "Being a hero, Vinny, always costs more than being a monster." The call ended. Silence hit harder than the words. Vincent lowered the phone, his face carved from stone. Tony placed a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" Vincent looked again at the boy with the blanket, the child who had nothing, yet tried to share the blanket with his mother. That single gesture told Vincent more than Marcus ever could. "We finish this," Vincent said quietly. "No matter the cost." Above them, Morrison's ram smashed the front doors open. Gunfire erupted. Shouts filled the warehouse as officers flooded the main floor. "Clear a path," Morrison yelled through the radio. "We're coming to you." Tony began guiding the victims toward the tunnel entrance. "Stay close. Stay low." Vincent lifted the smallest child into his arms, the toddler clinging to his shirt with trembling fingers. The warehouse shook from the force of the raid. Sirens wailed. Smoke drifted. Vincent looked toward the dock, toward the distant silhouette of Pier 47, where Marcus was stripping his empire bare. He whispered one promise into the dark, "I'm coming for you." Then he turned back toward the 43 lives waiting in the shadows, and led them out of hell. Dawn bled slowly along the pier, thin and colorless, turning the water into a sheet of bruised steel. Ambulance lights flickered over pale faces. Medics wrapped blankets around shoulders. Officers photographed every crate and lock, tagging them with meticulous chain of custody numbers. 43 survivors sat clustered beneath those flashing lights, silent, trembling, clinging to one another as if the world might disappear if they let go. Vincent stood apart from the crowd, coat torn, jaw set hard enough to crack stone. He wasn't looking at the paramedics or the cops. He was looking at the people, parents, hovering over children, teenagers, staring blankly at the horizon. A man holding a broken wrist, like it wasn't worth mentioning. Tony approached from the containers, boots heavy on the metal. "We got them all out. Morrison's boys are sweeping for stragglers." Vincent nodded once. Nearby, Morrison gripped a trafficker by the collar as officers cuffed him. The man spat a line of blood onto the ground and smiled. "A thin, sickle-curved thing. You think this stops anything?" He rasped. "You stopped a shipment, not the business." Morrison pushed him toward the squad car. "Start talking." The trafficker laughed. "Why? They already know he interfered." He jerked his chin at Vincent. Morrison froze. "Who knows?" The man's smile widened. "Kozlov." A chill cut through the morning air. Even the officers paused. Evan Tonis stiffened. Even the sea breeze felt colder. Kozlov wasn't a name. It was a curse. Vincent didn't blink. Morrison straightened, exhaling sharply. "Get him out of here, now." The officers dragged the man away. Tony stepped closer to Vincent. "Boss, we need to talk." But Vincent wasn't listening. A small boy was standing at his side, blanket draped over his shoulders like a cape too heavy to lift. The boy tugged his sleeve, just like Emma hours earlier. "Sir, were you the one who opened the door?" Vincent crouched down. "Yes." The boy nodded, as if confirmation alone was enough to anchor him back into the world. Morrison returned, breath visible in the cold air. "We've got a situation." One of the phones recovered from the guards. Tony cut in, holding a sealed evidence bag. This one, inside, a cracked burner phone, blinked with two unread messages. The first was stamped 4:23 a.m. Shipment confirmed. Pier 47 compromised. Proceed to fallback route. The second message, newer, was addressed directly. Vincent Torino. Vincent's jaw tightened as he read it. "Thanks for the distraction. Vinny, Pier 47 looks real empty without your stash. Appreciate the deposit. Marcus." Tony swore softly. Morrison's face darkened. Vincent only inhaled once. "Calm. Slow. Lethal." Morrison stepped beside him. "He robbed you while you saved these people." No one spoke. The survivors huddled quietly. The sea hissed against the pylons. A seagull cried overhead. Then Vincent sealed the evidence bag. "It's fine," he said. But Tony knew the tone. It meant it was not fine. It meant someone had just made the gravest mistake of their life. Morrison exhaled. "We can put out an alert, freeze ports, road surveillance. They won't use the same roads twice." Vincent said, "Kozlov moves like smoke. So what's next?" Morrison asked. Vincent looked at the survivors. Every bruised face, every trembling hand, every child clutching a blanket too thin for the cold. He spoke softly. "Next, I make them regret waking up today." He turned away from the pier. Tony fell into step behind him. But Vincent didn't walk toward the ambulances. He didn't walk toward the police vans. He didn't walk toward his car. He walked to the edge of the dock and looked out toward the horizon, the path that led straight to Pier 47. his pier, his territory, or what used to be. In the gray distance, the cranes at Pier 47 stood unmoving. No workers, no lights, no shipments. A graveyard of steel, emptied, violated, gutted. Marcus's parting gift. Footsteps stopped behind him. Morrison's voice rose quietly over the wind. Vincent, if you find something tonight, anything. Vincent didn't turn around. I'll call, he said, but his tone wasn't a promise. It was a warning, because the next call he made would not be to ask for help. It would be to tell Morrison the world was about to burn. Vincent chose the safe house no one remembered, a dead building in the industrial district, its windows boarded, its concrete walls sweating in the cold. Tony unlocked the steel door, pushing it open with a grunt. The room inside was empty, except for a table and a wall-sized map scarred from years of territory lines, routes, and ports. It looked like the skeleton of an empire. Vincent stood before it, silent. Tony spoke cautiously. Pier 47. It's gone. Marcus didn't just raid it, he gutted it. Vincent didn't flinch. His fingers brushed the old black lines on the map, routes he'd negotiated with blood, alliances cemented with fear. Then he picked up a red marker. He uncapped it with a soft click, a sound that felt like pulling the pin on a grenade. This map is dead, he said. Tony blinked. So what's the plan? Vincent lowered the marker and drew a brutal arc across 3 districts, an unbroken, merciless stroke of red that cut straight through neutral ground, a declaration. This, he said quietly, is the line. Tony frowned, meaning Vincent capped the marker. Anyone who crosses it disappears. The air chilled. Even Tony, who'd stood with Vincent for decades, felt the temperature drop. Before he could respond, his phone vibrated once. Urgent, he answered. Yeah. A pause. Boss. Tony lifted his eyes. We've got movement. Vincent didn't ask where. Tony continued, voice tightening. 2 SUVs. Koslov soldiers. Heading straight into your new zone. They're testing you. Vincent turned toward the door. Then I'll answer. Burnham Street was a long stretch of warehouses and rusted metal. Fog clung to the pavement like something alive. The only sound was the slow lap of water against the dock. Then the SUVs arrived. Black, tinted, full of muscle and arrogance, their headlights sliced through the fog as they rolled in, engines growling like predators claiming ground. The soldiers laughed. They weren't afraid. They were Kozlov men, trained to believe fear was something only other people felt. They crossed deeper into the district, and the world went dark. Every street lamp, dead. Every warehouse bulb, dead. Every light source, gone. Instant black. The drivers hit the brakes hard. Tires screaming. Headlights flicked back on automatically, cutting 2 white tunnels through the sudden void. Inside that light stood a man, Vincent, silhouette carved in the beams, unmoving, unbroken, waiting. The passenger whispered, "No way." The driver swallowed. "That's him." Vincent raised one hand. Not a threat, a summons. The fog answered. Tony stepped out behind the SUVs. Face unreadably. 2 lieutenants emerged from opposite alleys. Another descended soundlessly from the loading scaffold above, boots barely touching metal. Kozlov's soldiers scrambled for their gun, but they never cleared the holsters. What followed wasn't combat, it was disappearance. No gunshots, no screams, only the muted thud of a fist meeting bone, a short breath cut off halfway, a body collapsing against pavement, a van door sliding shut with surgical finality. Silence ate the street. Less than 30 seconds later, both SUVs sat empty with their doors hanging open. Kozlov's men were gone, erased, removed from the board like they'd never existed. The fog closed in again. Vincent stood at the center of it all, coat stirring in the cold wind. Tony approached quietly. "That's the first wave. They'll send more." Vincent's eyes were calm, almost peaceful. "Good." Back in the safe house, Tony spread the intercepted documents across the table. GPS log, burner phone numbers, cargo slips, digital pings. Every trail led to one man. Marcus. Vincent didn't sit. He stood over the table like a judge presiding over a trial. Tony folded his arms. He fed Kozlov everything. Routes, contacts, your schedules. Pier 47 wasn't luck. It was precision. Vincent finally spoke. "He thinks saving those people made me weak." Tony shook his head. "He thinks it made you distracted." Vincent reached into his coat and pulled out the napkin Emma had written on. The purple crayon word, the one that started all of this, looked small compared to the violence it unleashed. "Help." Vincent placed it gently over the red line he'd drawn. A vow, not a symbol. Tony watched. "Boss, what does that mean? For us?" Vincent stared at the map. "I'm done waiting for them to move." He folded the napkin once, carefully. "Now I hunt." He slipped it back into his pocket. "And I start with Marcus." 3 months later, the city moved differently. The ports were quieter. The shadows were thinner. And the people who used to walk with fear in their eyes walked with something closer to hope. High above it all, in an office overlooking the river, Vincent Torino stood alone. The room was new. Glass walls, dark stone floors, a view of every district he once controlled and every district he now protected. There were no trophies, no guns mounted on the walls, no symbols of power. Just a desk, a single leather chair, and a framed black and white photograph of his father on a small shelf. Vincent stood by the window, hands in his pockets, watching the city breathe beneath him. The war with Marcus and Kozlov had been fought in alleys, docks, and whispered meetings. It had been brutal, precise, and merciless, and he had won, but the victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like cleanup. A soft knock at the door pulled him from thought. Tony stepped in, holding a small envelope. "This came for you. No return address. Hand delivered." Vincent took it without a word. The envelope was plain, sealed with a piece of clear tape. Light. Too light to be dangerous. Heavy enough to matter. He opened it carefully. A folded sheet of thick paper slid out. The moment the purple crayon marks touched the light, Vincent stopped breathing. A drawing. Simple. Childish. Uneven. 3 stick figures. One tall man in a black suit. One woman with messy hair. One little girl with wide eyes. The tall man stood in front of them, arms out like a shield. Above their heads, in shaky letters, "Thank you for keeping your promise." Vincent stared at the page for a long time. He'd been called many things in his life. Monster, devil, king. But this was the first time someone had drawn him as something else. A protector. He traced the purple crayon lines with his thumb. The color wasn't perfect. It went outside the shapes. The stick arms were too long. The suit was just a filled black rectangle. But it was the truest portrait anyone had ever made of him. Tony shifted awkwardly. "You want me to find out who delivered it?" Vincent shook his head. He refolded the paper with surprising gentleness. Then he crossed the room and opened a drawer. Inside lay a simple wooden frame, empty, waiting. He placed the drawing inside and locked the back panel. The frame clicked shut. Vincent lifted it, weighing it in his hands. Then he walked to the shelf beside his father's photograph. The old black and white image looked back at him, his father leaning against a brick wall, smiling slightly, unaware of the bullet that would end his life 10 minutes after the picture was taken. Vincent placed Emma's drawing directly beside it. 2 generations, 2 worlds, 2 endings. His father's death had turned him into a monster. Emma's drawing reminded him that monsters could choose what they did with their teeth. Tony spoke quietly. "Boss, you okay?" Vincent didn't answer. Not at first. He opened his wallet. Inside, behind the credit cards and the forged IDs, lay a single folded napkin. The same napkin a little girl once kicked across a restaurant floor, written in purple crayon. "Help!" He slid it back into its place, close to the photograph, close to the drawing, close to everything that mattered. "Yeah," Vincent finally said. His voice was low, heavy, honest. "I'm fine." Tony hesitated. "What now?" Vincent closed the drawer, straightened his coat, and walked toward the door. "Now," he said, "I work." He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't redeemed. He was still a monster. But for the first time in his life, the monster knew exactly which side he stood on. As he stepped out of the office, the sunlight caught the framed drawing behind him. The purple crayon glowed faintly in the morning light, casting a soft reflection across the shelf. Below it, the city kept moving. Loud, messy, flawed, but safer. Vincent closed the door behind him, and the final echo lingered in the quiet room. A monster can't become a saint, but he can choose whom he terrifies. In the end, Vincent's journey reminds us of a truth many adults learn the hard way. Life rarely gives us clean heroes or perfect answers. Sometimes the people who protect us are the same people carrying their own darkness. And sometimes the person we fear, even the parts of ourselves we fear, can become the very force that breaks a cycle of silence, injustice, or abuse. At its heart, this story is about choosing to stand up when standing aside would be easier. It's about recognizing that doing the right thing often comes at a cost, but turning away from suffering costs far more in the long run. Like the old saying goes, the true test of character happens when no one is watching. Vincent doesn't become a saint. He simply refuses to let a child walk the same lonely path he once did. And that choice, quiet and personal, becomes his legacy. For many of us, especially those who have lived long enough to see both the good and the ugly in people, this story is a reminder that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper, a boundary drawn, a promise kept. And real strength isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it, whether you're facing an unfair situation, navigating a toxic relationship, or confronting long-held beliefs about your own worth. Remember this: silence protects the wrong side of the story. You have a right to be heard and a right to be safe. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments what part resonated with you most. Have you ever seen someone choose courage in an unexpected way? Tap the like button if the message spoke to you, and subscribe to the channel for more dramatic, meaningful stories every week. Wishing you clarity, peace, and the quiet strength to protect what matters most, even on the toughest days.